Welcome back to All This Math. This is Professor Parker. Now, please, before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to the All This Math YouTube channel. Make sure you share this video with somebody. All right. Make sure you drop a comment in the comment section or a question If you have a question about the methodology I use to solve this problem and anything that I try to explain. All right. Also, like the video. Go ahead and like the video. Go ahead and hit the button. All right. Now that we got that out the way, let's read the question. And also, where does this question come from? This is an example of the type of question someone might see on the HSPT exam. Now, what is the HSPT exam? It stands for the High School Placement Test, which is an exam that students in the 8th grade that attend Catholic or parochial schools will take, right, in order to measure where they place in terms of math, right, in preparation for high school, right? But these skills are not limited to Catholic and parochial schools, right? Students in public schools, charter schools, other private schools also should be familiar with these skills. Adults need to be familiar with these skills. Right now, this is a financial literacy question. I know financial literacy is very popular. It's a buzz term, right? So we need to understand things like simple interest versus compound interest. This problem is not about compound interest. It's about simple interest, right? But we need to understand percentages. We need to know how to do calculations, how to do arithmetic with percentages, how to do multiplication, all those types of things. We need to understand certain formulas. So now let's get into it. So this problem says a bank is offering 4.5% simple interest on a savings account. 4.5%, let me just tell you, that's very impressive. 4.5? Yeah. On a savings account? If you deposit $8,000 into this account, how much interest will you earn in 5 years? How much interest will you earn in 5 years? So, first things first, you should know the formula for simple interest. It's called simple interest because it's not compound. Nothing's compounding, right? It's simple interest, straightforward formula. You get the same amount of interest every year, no matter what. The same amount of interest based on the original principal, not what the money has grown into. That would be compound interest, right? That grows much faster, right? That's what you want. You want the compound interest, right? You don't want the simple interest if you have a choice. I mean, you take what you can get, sometimes, but if you have a choice between simple interest and compound interest, you want compound because the money grows faster and at a greater rate. But that's math. That's math. That's algebra, right? So, simple interest, capital I stands for the amount of interest earned, is equal to capital P. P stands for the principal. The principal is the original amount that was invested or deposited in this case. Times R. R is the interest rate. Interest rate is 4.5% times T. T is the time in years. The time in years, which is 5. All right. Principal, might as well circle that too. 8,000. All right. Now, under normal circumstances, you would just throw these numbers. P is 8,000. R is 4.5%. You want to take that out of percent format and convert that into decimal notation, which means you would divide this by 100, or take the decimal point, move it 2 spaces to the left, put the 0 in there for the placeholder, right? Replace R with that new number, replace T with 5, go to get your calculator, boom, 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 you get the answer. But the HSPT does not allow the use of calculators. So you need to know how to either find these answers using a mental math technique or go old fashioned. Do some written multiplication on your paper, or what I might do on the board. But so we're gonna have first, but let's write it out though, because we just want to know what the amount of interest is. We don't want to know the new balance, like the sneaks. That'd be a different thing, right? The new balance would be 8,000 plus the interest after 5 years, right? But this question only asks for the interest. It only asks about the interest. It don't ask about the new balance. All right. So we got P is going to be 8,000. And then R, like I told you R is the interest rate. R stands for rate, right? But you can't just throw 4.5 in there. That's going to be wrong. You can't just throw the 4.5 in there. You want to make it 0.045 because you got to take the decimal point and slide it 2 spaces to the left. Technically, what you're doing is you're dividing 4.5 by 100, right? And you're getting 0.045. All right. And then your T is time. How much time? 5 years. So you just put the 5 in there. All right. Now, How would I do this? What's the best way to do this? There's so many ways to do this. So many ways to do this. Now I'm just sitting back trying to think about how I would do this without a calculator. Right? This is a calculator problem. Right? But like I said, the HSPT exam does not allow calculators, so you have to know how to do this without a calculator. So what I actually would do though is this. I would use a method to find out what 4.5% of 8,000 is, and then I would take that dollar amount and multiply that by 5. Right? Now, how would I find out what 4.5% of 8,000 is? First, I would find out what 10% of 8,000 is. K stands for 1,000. 10% of 8,000, take the decimal point, this invisible decimal point at the end, move it over one space. That's going to be 800, right? Then I would find out what 5% is. Why would I find out what 5% is? Because that's close to 4.5%. 5% would be 400. How do I know that? Because I know that 10%, 5 is half of 10. 5 is half of 10. And because 5 is half of 10, I need to know what half of 800 is. Half of 800 is 400. So 5% is going to be 400. Now, what I also could do is now, in order to find out what 0.5% is, right? 0.5% is, move the decimal point over one space. 0.5%, if I move this decimal point over one space, this invisible decimal point, one space to the left, I got 0.5%. I move this invisible decimal point over one space to the left. That's going to be $40, right? So 0.5% is going to be $40. That's going to come in handy because look, this interest rate is 4.5%. So now I got my 0.5. Now I just need to know what 4% is. All right, 4%. Watch this. Watch this. Watch what I do. Watch me work. I'm going to find out what 1% of the original 8,000 is. 1% is just 10 is 1/10 of 10%. So then I need 1/10 of 800, which is $80. Now again, if you have any questions about anything I'm doing or anything I said, put it in the comments. Also, rewind the video, run it back to see what I did. All right. Plus, I'm gonna recap this anyway. All right. So look, where does 1% come from? And why do I care about 1%? That's another thing. When you're doing math problems, you watching somebody do math problems, if you're in class, raise your hand and ask the question, why are you doing that? How is that going to help us get to the answer? Because that's an important question. Whenever you're doing any math, you should know how doing that thing is going to help you get to the answer. The goal is to solve the problem and get to the answer. You should always be thinking, how is this going to help me solve the problem? So this is why I want to know what 1% is. If I know what 1% is, I could do 1 times 4 to get 4%. That's why I want 1%. Because if I know what 1% is, like I said, I'll say it again. I could do 1% times 4. That's going to equal 4%. Which now 1% was $80, right? So that's the same thing as doing $80 times 4. So 80 times 4, $80 that is, times 4 is going to be $320. So that's my 4%. And then my 0.5% is $40. So now my 4.5% is 320 plus 40. 320 plus 40. 4% plus 0.5%. 4% plus 0.5%. Right? Now I did have to go through some steps to get to that. Right? Right? So again, $40, right? And this should make sense because isn't 0.5 half of 1? 0.5 is half of 1, right? 0.5 is half of 1. And isn't $40 half of $80? See how that works? That's why I love math, because it always works out, right? As long as you do it correctly, it always works out. So we got 320 plus 40. That's going to be 360. So this is 8,000 times 0.045 is going to be 360. And I ain't even need a calculator. See that? I ain't even need a calculator, right? So now we're going to do 360 times 5. Why am I doing times 5? What I tell you, always ask why. Why are you doing that step? Because the formula says the principal times the interest rate times time. We already did the principal times the interest rate. That's what this is right here. That's how we got 360. That's how we got the 360, right? Well, all this that we did down here is equivalent to doing principal times interest rate. Principal times interest rate, right? We just broke it down using what are called benchmark percentages. Benchmark percentages. We figured out what 1% is. Why we do that? Because 1% times 4 is going to give me the 4%. Because at the end of the day, I'm trying to figure out what 4.5% is. If we figure out what 5% is, slide the decimal point one space to the left. Now I got 0.5%. Now I got 0.5%. So if I know 4% and what 4% is, how much money 4% is, I know how much money 0.5% is. I add them two amounts of money together. Now I got my 4.5%. See that's how it works. You got to be flexible with the math. All right. So you got 360 for 4.5%, and I just got to multiply that by 5. Now, why do I have to multiply that by 5? Why does this formula even make sense? Because that's how much money you're getting every year for 5 years. Now, that's why it's simple interest. It's simple interest because you get the same amount of interest. It's simple to calculate. Maybe that's why they call it that. Because you get the same amount of interest every single year. 360 after year 1, 360 after year 2, 360 after year 3, 360 after year 4, 360 after year 5, right? Compound interest is different because after year 1, if you add 360, now the value of your investment is 8,360. So now they're taking a percentage not based on the original 8,000. Now they're taking a percentage based on a bigger amount of money. And if it's based on a bigger amount of money, that means the amount of interest is going to be bigger than what it was at first. It's not going to be 360 no more. It's going to be more than 360. And it's going to grow faster. Whereas simple interest, you're getting the same interest every year. You locked in. You're getting that same interest every year. That's why it's simple, right? Simple to calculate. Compound interest, calculation is a little more challenging, but you get more money. You're getting more money, right? Compounding, right? I got other videos on the channel about compound interest. Check them out in my personal finance playlist. Check out the personal finance playlist. All right. So we got 360 times 5. So now let's do some mental math to figure out 360 times 5. Now, what do I know? I know 300. I could break this 360 down into $360. $300 and $60. What's 300 times 5? 1,500. What's 60 times 5? 300. What's 1,500 plus 300? 1,800. So that is the amount of interest you would have after 5 years based on a 4.5% interest rate. Now, I know that might be, overwhelming. Might have seemed like a whole lot. Might have seemed like, oh, this took too long. Listen, just rewind the video. It's worth it. You need to understand how to do this. Not only like what I did right here, what I just broke down for you, I showed you how to calculate percentages without a calculator, right? Where does 10% come from? 10%, slide the decimal point one space over to the left. You get 800. 10% of 8K, $800. Where did 5% come from? 5% is half of 10%. So that means that 5% would also be half of the 800, which is going to be 400. Where did 0.5% come from? Wait, but why do I even care? Why do I care what 0.5% is? Because my interest rate was 4.5%. And the beauty of this is that this ain't the only way to do it. There's other ways somebody else could have did it that are still mathematically correct. But 0.5%, I care about that because my interest rate is 4.5%. So my 0.5%, I slide the decimal point one space over to make 0.5%. So that means I slide the decimal point over one space for 400, and I make $40. So my 0.5% is $40. Then I want to know what 1% is. Why? Because I'm trying to find out what 4% is. 4% is just 1% times 4. That's all it is. 4% is just 1% times 4. So if I can figure out what 1% is, 1% is just 1/10 of 10%. Because 1 times 10 equals 10. So I can take 10% of this, 10% of 800 is just $80. Or 1/10 of $800 is just $80. We got to be good with this type of math. Math is a language. We got to know how to speak it, read it, and what is it? Speak it, read it. Oh, write it. Yeah, we got to know how to speak it, read it, and write it. A part of math as a language is percentages. Another large part of math as a language is fractions. We got to understand fractions and percentages. We have to. It's a non-negotiable, right? You got to just do it. Like if you're a grown man or woman watching this, you got to know this. If you got children or if you're a child watching this, you got to know this too. It's not that hard. It might seem difficult. That just means you haven't had enough practice yet. Once you get enough practice, you're going to be straight. Trust me. So anyway, 4% is going to be 80 times 4 because 1% is $80. 80 times 4 is 320. Put the 4% with the 0.5%, you end up with 4.5%, which is 360. That's how much interest you make in 1 year. But they're doing this and you leaving the money in there for 5 years. That means you're getting that 360 after year one, you're getting another 360. Like December 31st, they're gonna hit your account. Boom, 360. Boom, 360, 360, 360, 360. 360 times 5. 360 times 5. That's where you get the 1,800 from. Final answer, $1,800. All right. I'm kind of glad they don't let you use calculators because this is it's cool to challenge yourself to be able to figure things out and not have to always overly rely on computer technology or chat GPT or ask Siri or ask Alexa or use some app on your phone. Use your brain. Your brain is the original app. All right. So, like I said, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Make sure you like the video. Make sure you share this video with somebody. If there's anything you didn't understand, I know I went over a whole lot. If there's anything you didn't understand, rewind it. Watch it again. All right. Also, put your questions in the comments. Put your questions in the comments. And I might do a follow-up video so you get better understanding. All right. See y'all later.